Welcome back to another episode of the Tim Boxeo Show. We have a really special show for you guys today. I mean, we are going to talk about a fan favorite in the Tim Boxeo world, the return of, do we call him King Saul Farah, or was that reserved for somebody else? I don't remember. But he's one of the kings of club boxing, or at least in the world of Tim Boxeo as we define club boxing. But before we get into all of that, we have to remind you that this is not your average boxing podcast. We are not going to talk about Manny Pacquiao and your Dennis Ugas. At least I don't think we are, but we may make an exception for Manny Pacquiao as we did last week. But if you want to hear about the recently announced Caleb Plant and Canelo Alvarez fight, this is not the podcast for you. We are going to take a trip around the world of club boxing. We're going to look in the cracks, the crevices. We're going to look for the good, the bad, everything in between. And so if that's something you're into, you're in the right spot. If not, no worries. You definitely should go find another podcast that's going to cover more of the mainstream of boxing. You should follow at Tim Boxeo on Twitter. Send him a message. Say, what do you like to listen to when you're trying to hear about all this other stuff? And he will give you his recommendations. Now, if you're up for that, though, we got none other than the TC Boxing Hall of Famer, really the most reliable source for all club boxing news. That is Tim Boxeo. And I also want to mention that we will be bringing on a close friend of the podcast in just a little bit. You may have heard him on broadcast. You may have heard him doing play-by-play commentary, or you may have seen his tweets about the WBA situation we had a couple weeks ago, and that is Corey Erdman. But anyway, Tim, with all that said, my long intro out the way, how's it going?
It's going great. It's going great. It was kind of a we had the King Saul Farah experience, which was spectacular. Other than that, it was kind of a down week overall for boxing on the club level. The things we're going to discuss were fantastic, but the sheer volume of fights was really, really low compared to most weeks. So I'm glad that we got some real gems from the week, because we could have swung and missed. So it was kind of depressing. I was like, gosh, the weekend's over, and I felt like I needed more boxing.
Well, I think we've held off long enough. What happened this weekend with Saul Farah? He faced Pedro Tabares down in Tabares' hometown of Pando, Bolivia. Pedro Tabares, in their first meeting, created a viral moment in boxing where he threatened the life of Saul Farah by dropping him with a pretty good shot, but then finishing up by trying to stomp on his head. They rematched. I imagine things were very heated in the lead up. Tell me, how did it go?
That was a great introduction. Well, first of all, I need one answer from you before we get going. I listen. Shout out to the Sunday Puncher podcast. I listened to your post-fight podcast after Pacquiao versus Ugas, which I watched and really enjoyed. And I really enjoyed your podcast. However, no mention in the post-fight podcast that I'm sure you guys were up until 3 a.m. Eastern time doing. No mention of Farah Tabares 2. How do you answer for yourself on that?
Well, you see, one of the main principles that we like to follow is we don't cross streams. If you show up to a boxing fight or a boxing event, you're not there to watch a musical performance. And if they do it, you're like, all right, cool. But like realistically, you're not out here trying to watch a concert when you go to a fight, and vice versa. When you come to a podcast to hear Manny Pacquiao, you don't want to hear about a 268-pound quote-unquote Bridgerweight fight. So we didn't cross the streams. And I wouldn't like to, they're going to listen over here, and if you really want, you can't get both stories in both places. Pacquiao, okay, I understand, but not Saul.
That's fair. So let me ask a better question. Was there any urge? Was there any, a seed in the back of your head where you're getting ready to close the podcast and you're thinking to yourself, do I do it? Do I mention Farah Tabares too? or do we just close? Tell me there was an urge, at least, in your gut.
You know, the funny thing is, while we were recording the podcast, somebody was talking, and I was like looking at Twitter, and I did go to your Twitter to look at if you had posted the result, because I think I had looked in your Discord, and I saw you were talking about the stoppage, and I was like, oh, I got to see this. Tim had to have posted it already.
Okay. All right. Good. All right. Good. Great. This is great news. All right. So I totally took the wind out of our sails because you gave a very well-described, passionate introduction to the rematch from Saturday in Pando, Bolivia. And listeners to our show were no doubt looking very much forward to this fight. A fight that, from a timing perspective, this is great. From a timing perspective on Saturday, essentially for me took the place of the co-feature to Pacquiao versus Ugas. By the time I got my clip edited up, which only took a minute or two, and got it tweeted out for the Farah Tabares 2 fight, we were doing ring walks in Las Vegas. So it was completely perfect. The fight, like I said, Saturday night. So I tweeted out some weigh-in videos. I posted the pics of the weigh-in in our Discord on Friday. And after the fight on Saturday night, I was minutes away from doing a solo emergency pod for my patrons. Our exclusive, of course, Patreon club boxing community, the hardest of the hardcore. And I want to say I added you at Discord. No, I didn't. I didn't add you because I figured the Pacquiao-Ugas fight was kind of wrapping up, and I thought, you're probably kind of preparing for your thing. But I did make a comment in your Discord that I need to jump on and do a emergency pod, and it was just crickets. No one replied or said anything. I'm like, all right, maybe I'm in the wrong Discord. Okay, so I've closely detailed the history here on previous shows on our podcast over the last number of episodes, if you're a consistent listener to the show. So this fight, if you're not, was a rematch from the first fight between the two men, which happened, believe it or not, just in June, just almost 2 months to the day, and also in Pando, Bolivia, which is Pedro Tabares' hometown. Now, you did a great job of outlining essentially what happened in that first fight, and Tabares knocked Farah down and then jumped on Farah while he was on the ground, hit him in the head a few times with a few blows, and then got to his feet and proceeded to stomp on his head. That video went viral worldwide. And I know viral gets used loosely a lot, but I'm telling you, if you Google Pedro Tabares, Saul Farah, and then click on news and Google, you'll get a flavor of all of the different sites that publish news on that first fight. And it really did go viral across the world. Now, Farah took the win in that one, obviously through a disqualification, retaining his Bolivian interim heavyweight title. A lot of people thought that a first fight was for the Bridgerweight title, and there was no weigh-in numbers available, so it was difficult to tell. And also, the fight wasn't on BoxRec. More to come on that, but you couldn't look up the next day and say, shocking. You couldn't look up the next day and say, Farah weighed this and Tabares weighed that after their first fight, and it's still not on BoxRec. So the rematch that just happened Saturday night was made pretty quick, actually, towards the end of July. Farah was calling for it. He was doing a joint interview, lasted about a half an hour in Bolivia on television with Tabares, and both men wanted the fight. This was late July, early August. And in the build-up to that, the fight got made pretty quickly afterwards. It was contested on, the 21st of August. And I want to say the fight was made probably around 5, 6, 7 August, right in that time frame. And to take things on this build-up a step further, you might imagine, of course, that the news went pretty worldwide that they were going to fight again. It didn't. Probably because we're in Pando, Bolivia, which really is in the middle of the Amazon. But there's one caveat to it, and that is that at the national level, esteemed writer Jake Donovan, longtime writer for Boxing Scene, did his own research, did his own work, published a piece on the rematch, and I'm humbled to say that I was included in a little bit in there, and I shout out to Jake. I really appreciate that. But did publish a piece Saturday morning on Boxing Scene, recapping everything that happened to this point and then previewing the fight. And I have the link in the show notes so you can read Jake's piece, previewing Saturday's rematch. Now, one of the major points that wasn't discussed anywhere in the build-up for this fight,
and is a very interesting question that if you were willing to just not be shocked by the video clip that you posted, but then kind of think about the next logical step of what happens or what's supposed to happen when somebody gets in a boxing ring and starts stomping a mud hole in someone. That is a very interesting question, which I did not see asked anywhere when the rematch was announced.
No, and shout out to...
Oh, you have to also say what the question is.
Well, shout out to both of our communities on Discord, because I think almost everyone, when this topic comes up, asks this question, and it's a bunch of smart boxing fans and we'll discuss it on the Tim Boxeo show, even though it wasn't discussed anywhere else, is 2 months to the day after Pedro Tabares, as you said, stomped on Saul's head 3 times, nearly killing the man. How is he able to fight in just 2 months in a rematch against Farah?
Clearly, they just sent him to the corner for 10 minutes.
I mean, any commission in the world, right? Especially considering, you would think, the amount of publicity the event got the first time around from major news outlets worldwide, would have levied a suspension against Tabares. And that did not happen in the case. Like I said, the negotiations started publicly about a month afterwards. And Farah referenced after the first fight that he'd be filing a lawsuit against Tabares. Tabares, on the Monday after the first fight, held a press conference and issued an apology. And Farah said he was also submitting evidence to the Bolivian Commission requesting a suspension. And of course, a suspension didn't happen. So why didn't a suspension happen is then the third question, right? After the first one is, how is he allowed? Wasn't he suspended? The answer to that question is no, he wasn't. And then the next logical question is, well, why not? I did send a message out
Bolivia.
to...
What do you think?
We're in the Amazon. I did send this very question out to the head of the Bolivian Boxing Commission. I did not get a response.
Here doing his research.
Yep. Doing some work.
You did not get a response.
I did not get a response, which doesn't mean anything. Maybe they don't monitor the inbox, whatever.
Did you ask it in Spanish?
I did. I wrote it in Spanish.
All right, I'm just covering the most obvious outcome here, guys.
Yep, I wrote it in Spanish, verified by my wife. And she's like, yep, that's what you're trying to say. I'm like, okay, good. So I did reach out, and we've got an exclusive here, Angelo, for the listeners of the Tim Boxeo show. I did reach out to a contact that I have that's very, very close to the situation in Bolivia. And his name is not Saul Farah.
That was literally my first question. It's it's Saul, isn't it?
No, it's not Saul Farah. But it's someone almost as close as Saul Farah and Pedro Tabares, and it's not the promoter or the commissioner. And this person tells me that the reason why Tabares was not suspended was at the request of Saul Farah. Now, I don't know if the request was a direct request or indirect request, if you're following what I'm saying, that the two could have an immediate rematch. Now, Farah was paid a pretty decent sum after the first fight. I'm sure Tabares was as well. And credit to Tabares and the people of Pando. Can't imagine there's a lot of live boxing in Pando, Bolivia. They came out for that first fight. Pretty good crowd. And there's no doubt that a rematch between the two and a quick rematch, especially considering how many fights Saul Farah has, was the best viable option for both fighters, both financially as well as from just an overall exposure perspective. And so that person told me that's really the clean and simple part of it. And it won't be any surprise to listeners of our show who I know are really smart boxing fans that stuff like that, whether we want to talk about it or not, and this probably isn't that specific even to Bolivia, stuff like that happens all the time. I'm not sure it happens in a case that is so severe as this, where a pretty good shots were taken to Farah's head on the ring canvas. But nonetheless, that is the reason I was given, and quite frankly, it fills in the gaps for me, and it makes sense what I know about boxing and what I know about different areas of the world outside of U.S. and Europe in boxing. Now, as a side note, I did have someone mention on Twitter too, and I thought it was kind of funny, not in a disrespecting way, but I did get a laugh out of it, that whether these two fights, the first one and this rematch, were actually pro fights, because they aren't listed on BoxRec. And I don't know what to say about that other than
that's a good point.
It's a valid question. I just laughed at it though, because some of the things we talk about here, from Bolivia to Ghana to even as something as common as Tijuana, doesn't make it on BoxRec either at all or until late. And I think BoxRec Gray addressed this when he was on our show, if I'm not mistaken. And between Bolivia and BoxRec, at some point in the past, that relationship was damaged. And some of Farah's fights the past year have been added in the recent months in the rear, but there are still Farah fights from 2021, 4 including this one, that haven't been added to BoxRec, and they may or may not. There's a fight from 2019 Farah had in the Democratic Republic of Congo that's still not on BoxRec. So whether or not they'll be added, I don't know. But yes, these were both pro fights. Shout out to my Twitter followers. Thank you that's a very logical question. All right, so as I mentioned, the weigh-in goes off without a hitch. I eagerly anticipated the weigh-in Friday morning, and it was streamed live on Facebook. So I was really excited about that. Kind of a pleasant surprise. I wasn't expecting that. Farah weighs in at 117 kilograms, so 258 pounds, and does so in a pretty unnoteworthy way. If that's a phrase. And then Tabares steps on the scale, and he steps on the scale, and 90 kilograms is announced, 198 pounds. Tabares gets off the scale, appears he's getting ready to answer some questions with some folks holding cell phones. A minute or so goes by. Maybe it felt like a minute, maybe a little less. And Tabares is called back to the scale. Tabares steps on the scale the second time, and 91 kilograms is announced, 200 pounds. And more on that in a second, because immediately then we go to the interviews leading up to, after the weigh-in. So Farah, I'm sorry. Let me backtrack 1 second. They do a face-to-face, as we always do in interviews. It's pretty tense. I'm expecting some pushing and shoving, but nothing really happens. Not even really any shit talk. So nothing to really speak of there. The men are separated, and then we go and we start some immediate interviews on the same stream, and this all happens pretty quick. Tabares is asked if he will KO Farah this time for real. And Tabares gives an answer. He says it's impossible for a fighter to predict his KO, but I'm ready to fight, and the work has been done. It's really the most meaningful thing he says. Nothing really noteworthy from Tabares after that. We move on to interview with Saul Farah. Farah says he's ready. He's also put in the work. He's the champion, and he has nothing against the people of Pando or Tabares. But this time, I will do what I say I'm going to do. I'm a man of my word, and I will KO Pedro Tabares. And Farah's interview gets a little heated. He gets a little passionate about his response, and it gets me excited because I'm ready for the king. I'm ready for Saturday night. Now we move to an interview with the promoter, and this will point back to the weigh-in. The promoter immediately begins to talk about this being a heavyweight fight, and Tabares should weigh at least 91 kilograms or 200 pounds. And he says, while Tabares is on the very light end. There are no issues because he did weigh 91 kilograms. So we have a heavyweight fight for the interim Bolivian title without issue. Now, of course, me and you, Angelo, and listeners to our show know that the promoter statement is not correct, right? He's got it kind of flip-flopped. Obviously, you can't weigh higher than a weight class other than heavyweight on the upper limit, but the lower limit typically doesn't matter and can be negotiated.
Right.
So I don't know if that was a point in the contract or not, that Tabares had to weigh at least 200 pounds. It wasn't referenced after that. But nonetheless, it did seem like his true weight was 90 kilograms, and for some reason we weighed him in and we got him to 91.
Why didn't they just tell him to put his clothes on?
Or not take him off, right? Which happens all the time in heavyweight fights.
Like, technically, he could have walked up to the ring holding, like, his duffel bag. Or sorry, not the ring, but the scale. Why would that have mattered?
I know.
It was really like, you just weigh whatever you want. That's the whole point. That's why heavyweight is as popular as it is.
Yeah, true. Well, just think about it though as like a middleweight fight, right? So it's a 160-pound fight, and guy number one weighs 160, and then the other guy weighs 150, below the junior middleweight limit, the light middleweight limit. We've seen it in the past. It's not terribly common, but it happens. My assumption would be that would have to be something the fighters would have to agree to or negotiate to. I don't think, well, I'm getting off in a rabbit hole. Ultimately, it doesn't really matter. So parking lot that for another time. Okay, so let's get off to Saturday night. And on the first fight, there was only 2 Facebook streams, and one of them was Saul Farah's personal page. So there was essentially only 2 streams available. And on this fight, there's no shortage of 6 unique sites. And then another 6 essentially duplicating those streams. So the fight was readily available all across Facebook. The quality wasn't spectacular, but we had, graphics, and it wasn't a cell phone held vertically. It was just more or less an internet problem. So the quality of the stream and what you were seeing, although it never dropped, wasn't spectacular. So Farah Tabares 2 was actually the only pro fight on the card. So a few amateur bouts happened, and it was a number of hours. We got a live video from Saul's Facebook page of him warming up in the dressing room, which was,
a sight.
It's must see. It's top-notch stuff. I tweeted that out on my Twitter page. You have to see it if you haven't. Now, there really isn't any animosity on the ring entrances, the pre-fight instructions. The bell rings for the first round. And now here we are with the opening round of the fight. And with everything that's happened between these two men in the last almost year now, including the first fight, which we've talked about extensively to this point, I would have expected some pushing, some shoving, something to happen, and nothing really happened. So we're just looking forward to a good, solid 12-round fight as the bell rings for the opening round. Now, I wish I could tell you that the fight itself was action-packed and full of intrigue. I wish I could walk you through the high points of the fight. In round 4, this happened. Round 8, this happened. And that the drama built as it went round from round. Unfortunately, neither one of those things really happened. Now, the best analogy I could give you to describe rounds 1 through 11, and hopefully all the listeners of the show will know exactly what I'm talking about when I say this, because this is top of mind from just 2 weeks ago, is that it was a Bolivian club version of Casimiro Rigondo from 2 weeks ago. The fight was tense. It was competitive, very close, but I don't think we had more than 5 punches by either fighter thrown in any single round from 1 through 11. It was a lot of walking around the ring and ending up in clinches, separating and then walking around the ring some more. Someone asked me on Twitter as we went to the championship rounds. I said, we're off to the championship rounds 11 and 12. Someone said, who's winning? And I thought, oh, shit, I don't score fights, number one, because I suck at it. But number two, I just really wanted to watch the fight and try to document what was happening to share with everyone. And my gut just told me at that time that it was a really close fight. I just felt it was pretty even. You know, you're splitting hairs on so many of these rounds trying to determine who's winning a fight because so little action happens. But let me detail for you the 12th and final round, as this where the entire story kind of peaks and it comes to a massive conclusion. Now, the referee calls the fighters in, and surprisingly, Tabares and Farah actually hug at center ring as the bell sounds to start the action. Not what I was expecting in the 12th round. Now, the first 60 seconds of the 12th round are identical in the previous 11 rounds. Farah is in the center of the ring, kind of owning that space, moving towards Tabares. Tabares is staying away, but he's moving slowly too. It's not like he's dancing around the ring. Now, Tabares jumps in, as what happened really through most of the fight. And then the two men come together. Really no meaningful punch lands. We're in a clinch. And it happens again. And now, as I said, 60 seconds have passed. Farah is again following Tabares around. And this time he cuts off the ring and pushes Tabares back into the corner. He throws a wild right hook. It misses the mark. And Tabares throws a counter shot right back. That misses. And now we're getting an exchange without any. It's what stuff? What did you say?
I said thrilling stuff here.
It's thrilling because this is the first time in the whole fight. I know you're joking, but it is thrilling because this is the first time in the whole fight that we're getting an exchange without a clinch. And I'm serious. This is the first time in the fight. So Tabares misses his counter shot. They clinch ever so slightly. Farah takes a step back, throws another right hook, and this one lands flush on Tabares. It catches Tabares' attention for sure. Farah fires back with a left hook, nothing there, but then he loads up again, and this time he lands, and he lands big. Tabares falls forward into Farah, almost identical of the knockdown in their first fight in round number 6 when the roles were reversed. But this time it's Farah who essentially pushes Tabares down to the canvas. Now, my gut reaction initially when I saw it live was it was nothing more than a push. So the knockdown scene is almost identical, like I said, of the last time. Now, Tabares is quickly back up to his feet to get the referee count. Farah is directed to the neutral corner by the referee, and you can tell Tabares here is on unsteady legs. He's backing himself into the corner, and he's got his hands up on the ropes as a referee finishes his 8 count. And boxing fans will know the perfect analogy for this is it's almost identical to the scene visually of Joshua versus Ruiz from 2019 when Joshua's got his arms up on the ropes in the corner and receiving the 8 count. Of course, this is almost identical in significance to that fight as well, of course, obviously. And Tabares has his arms up. The referee tells Tabares, come on, walk towards me, right? Very common thing to do. Tabares does not come forward. Referee again says, come towards me. No response. So what does the referee do? He does what every Bolivian referee would do. Fuck it, let's fight. So he calls Farah in. Farah, who is just immediately, steps away from Tabares at this point, jumps on Tabares, immediately lands a left hook, a right hook, another left. Tabares is now falling between the ropes, between the top rope and the second rope, and the referee jumps in, calls a halt to the action at 1 minute and 30 seconds into the 12th and final round. Tabares still on his feet, but is definitely stunned in the corner. Farah now celebrating in the center of the ring, beating his chest as he walks around, raising his hands to the crowd. And the El Gran Campeón Saul El Phoenix Asesino Farah improves to 76, 27-3, with 63 of those wins by thunderous knockout, while Tabares in his young career falls to 0-2. And it was a fantastic scene in the ring as Farah is announced the winner in Tabares' hometown of Pando. So there we have it for the fight night.
I just want to say that in watching the clip of the stoppage, the referee was 100% wrong to have let that fight continue. Tabares looks completely out of it. He doesn't even look like he knows he's in a boxing ring. And the referee was like, hey, it's good enough for me. His eyes are open.
It was a really long count. I went back and looked at that. He gave him about a 12 count instead of a standing 8. And then you're right. I mean, any boxing observer would look at that video and go, there's no reason why that fight should have continued. But the hometown guy hoping that something happens and we can get Tabares to the final bell. And that'll make sense here in a second. So we get some controversy after the fight. Let me close with this. Is that both fighters are interviewed.
Letting Tabares continue wasn't controversial enough? Okay, what do you got?
That was pretty controversial. So both fighters are interviewed after the fight. Farah says, I'm a man of my word. I said I'd come and do what I had to do, and that's exactly what I did. I fought this fight fair, and this time left no doubt. He goes on in his interview to give Tabares some advice on how to be a better boxer. Don't give up on his career. I thought that was pretty great. Farah also mentions, and I clarified with the King on this note on Monday, we're recording here on Tuesday, that he has fights scheduled in September and October in Colombia and in November in Germany. So El Gran Campeon is hitting the road to continue the glory going forward. Now, Tabares' story in the post-fight interview is completely different, as you might imagine. Tabares in his post-fight interview says, listen, I won every round of that fight until the 12th round. A statement that was repeated in the Bolivian media. And as I said here just a couple of minutes ago, when I heard him say that, I was shocked. I couldn't believe it. I mean, so little happened in those 11 rounds. I guess if you're giving every single round to the home fighter, which if we would have got to the scorecards, I guess probably would have happened. But there's no way any boxing observer would have watched that fight and said Tabares won every round. It's just impossible. So Tabares, though, and this is where the controversy comes in, says he was hit by an illegal blow to the back of the head. And that is what put him to the canvas. And then he goes on to show the bruises to prove it. And the camera turns on its light and zeroes in and shows some marks right behind Tabares' right ear. He said, listen, everyone can see this on the video. And the actual video of the knockdown, you'll see Farah hit me illegally behind the head. Tabares goes on to say, I will compile that evidence. I will submit it to the Bolivian Commission, and I expect the result to be overturned and Farah to be disciplined, which, of course, just drips of some irony that's just off the charts.
So, I mean, just to state what everyone is probably thinking, the guy who literally kicked a guy in the face in a boxing ring is now crying foul and believes that the commission is going to take his evidence for illegal blows seriously. The nerve of Pedro Tabares is admirable. If only he fought as well.
Oh, it's fantastic. The first response is the only reason you were allowed to fight is because Saul Farah allowed that to happen. So there we are there. And then it just goes on. So that is the story of the week.
I believe that this is not the last time these two have fought. And if Saul's history can indicate anything against very inexperienced opponents, we may get 7 or 8 more fights between these two guys.
We can only hope. It would be spectacular. It was great. It was all worth it.
All right. Well, no good way to segue out of that one, because really none of the fights that we're going to talk about will bring the drama of the Saul and Pedro saga, which I don't think is finished, but we'll put a cap on it there, and then we'll switch over to, were there any fights that weren't necessarily as slow paced as the Farah and Tabares fight? Any barn burners we could talk about?
There's a barn burner I definitely want to talk about. I'm so excited to share it too, because I've been alluding to this for how many ever episodes we're into now, and we finally have a chance to talk about it, and that is a potential club fight of the year Friday in Tanzania. And if you've never watched the build-up and actual gala itself in Tanzania, I'd strongly recommend it. Or you can pay close attention to my Twitter timeline on fight weekend, and I'll document it for you. But the Tanzanians love their boxing. And there's so much evidence of that on my Twitter timeline. I was digging through some of my old tweets for the last 3 years or so and looking to share some things with a few people. And I must have at least 20 clips on Twitter of things that very akin to what I'm about to share with you now. That is just great build-up, great action in the ring, and just spectacular entertainment from Tanzania. And Friday, we had a trilogy fight in the super middleweight division as Twaha Kiduku, 17-8-1 with 8 knockouts, takes on Dula Mbabe, 29-10-1 for the second time, almost exactly a year ago from Kiduku scoring a 10-round decision victory. And the two initially fought 10 rounds back in 2017, that fight ending in a draw. And the cool part about this fight, in typical Tanzanian fashion, is that the winner here drives away with something called a brand new Toyota Crown executive sedan, which in my research I found out is essentially a Toyota manufactured in Japan and typically only available in the Asian market. So I tweeted out...
Looks like a Camry.
I thought it looked like a Chrysler 300 almost. It's a little better looking than a Camry. Come on.
It's been a while since I've seen a Camry. It looks like a Camry. It looks like a big sedan. It looks like the... Oh, it's essentially the Avalon in the U.S. Jesus. No, I mean, it's just what Wikipedia says.
Oh, it does? Okay.
Needless to say, not a bad car. Toyota, very... those things are workhorses. So in terms of a price for a fight, this is fair.
Okay. All right. Good. All right. So we're okay. So we're on the same page in the end. Fantastic. So
Tim took issue with the fact that I called this a Camry.
Yeah. We were about to have a whole dialogue about that.
Insulting my car knowledge.
Yeah. So the Tanzanians love their boxing, as I mentioned. They typically a pretty good crowd at these weigh-ins that are held in public squares. And the build-ups outside the venue, you see dancing, music, just outright party. And this one was no different. I have a clip in the show notes that I had tweeted out. You can take a look at.
Oh, wow. I'm just looking at the notes here. All those pictures you posted were from the same show?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Oh, wow. All right. Well, you guys, if you didn't see his timeline, you're in for a treat now.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I'll just highlight one interesting observation. For some reason, in the crowd, I did notice we had two gentlemen in diapers. Each one of them had a boxing glove on their hand. I'm not really sure what they were doing, but they were dancing and they had diapers on.
They were going to fight.
Not really. They were ready to fight. Get the shit beat out of them, I guess. That was just there. I had to do it. So it was like a softball. So also saw some crazy things in the scene outside the ring. I always enjoy the T-shirts that different folks are wearing in the crowd. Shout out to the Philadelphia Flyers fan. We had a Flyers fan out there. Shout out to him. You see a lot of homemade fighter T-shirts. I always think that's pretty cool. Shout out to my man wearing the Toronto Blue Jays fitted hat. I'm not sure where he got that, but it was sharp. Looked brand new. So one of the challenges with the Tanzanian undercards, though, is they typically kind of long. And when I say long, I literally mean like 5 to 6 hours. And it's all pro fights. And depending on the matchups, this isn't always the case, but sometimes the undercards drag a bit. So I was a bit exhausted by the time we got to the main event. But that doesn't stop the fans' intensity. I mean, sometimes these main events don't kick off till 2, 3 in the morning in Africa. And I tweeted out just a picture of a clip of some fans outside the venue who either didn't make it in or just chose not to, but little kids out there, we're deep into the morning now, and they're watching the fight card right outside the venue on a big screen TV with their with their lawn chairs set up. I mean, Tanzanians love boxing. So, as I said, in the main event, we had a trilogy, and Kaduku took the unanimous decision victory 1 year ago. And so I was intrigued to see, why are we having a rematch? And, the first fight looked to be a pretty wide unanimous decision. I don't remember it. I know I watched it, but it wasn't really ringing a bell. So I was intrigued by the fight. The first round, the bell rings, and we get great back and forth action as these two guys are going at it. Both fighters really coming forward, both trying to fight on the front foot. For the first 2 minutes of the round, we're getting great exchanges. Kaduku is a bit stockier, more muscular of the two fighters. And Mbappe's kind of a tall, long, lanky super middleweight. But both fighters definitely asserting themselves here as we get to just about 30 seconds left in the first round. Kaduku steps forward and tries to throw a heavy right hand that misses the mark. And Mbappe really quickly counters with a right of his own. Kaduku being really lazy, pulling that right hand back, and Mbappe's is straight up the middle, lands flush, and Kaduku is dropped on his ass, dropped really flat on his back. He's kind of looking up towards his feet, trying to figure out how he's going to get back up, and he barely beats the 10 count. And the referee now finishes her count of 10 with a female referee in this case. Kaduku stumbles forward, kind of stumbles into the referee. Kaduku is struggling here as he's getting back to his feet. And again, what happens when we have a fighter barely making the 10 count and then stumbling into the referee? Of course, it means fight on. So the referee calls the action back. We've got just about 15 seconds now left here in the first round, and Mbappe goes for the kill. He surges, pushes a dazed Kaduku back into the corner, and really unleashes a flurry of punches. And I'm telling you, in the United States, this fight would have been waved off. There is no doubt about it. Mbappe's landing with every one of these shots. Kaduku's in big trouble here with just about 1 or 2 seconds left to go. Amazingly, the bell sounds. Kaduku starts to go off to the wrong corner, has to be turned around by the referee and pushed back to his own corner. And I can't believe that the bell finishes that round, and it does. So we kick off the second round, some more shaky moments to start it off as Kaduku's still not right, and Mbappe still coming forward to try to finish him off. Now, Angela, I wish I could tell you I had a bunch more drama to share with you. It was great exchanges here as we went from round 2 all the way to round 10, but it was kind of a blueprint that just played itself over and over. Not really much major drama other than Kaduku really just started to pile up round after round after round, and I was just shocked to see that a man that was completely out on his back, I didn't even think he was going to get up, much less finish the first round. And we just really had excellent back and forth action as we went through all the way to the 10th round. And we did reach the final bell, and the scores were announced. Twaha Kaduku again beats Dula Mbappe, and he improves to 18-8-1, getting down from that really hard knockdown in the first to take a dominant unanimous decision. And scores are read 98-91 times 3. He gets the win in the trilogy bout, and he also drives away with this brand new, quote, Toyota Crown Executive Sedan. And I also tweeted out the day after the fight, we had a parade in Kaduku's honor in his hometown, and it was amazing. I mean, it looked like a ticker tape parade on the scale of Tanzania in the United States for Kaduku. And again, just shows how much the Tanzanians love their boxing. Fantastic scene all around, and really great action on Friday.
All right, I'm happy that he got the Toyota Crown. I can't imagine. At least according to Tim, it wasn't a Camry.
No Camry.
All right. What else do we have for us this weekend?
Yeah, let me just quickly run rapid fire on a couple of things that happened of note. There was an awkward finish in Hamburg, Germany. Very notable Kazakh heavyweight, Zan Kosubetsky. improves to 16-0 with 15 knockouts. Scores a KO2 win over Philly fighter Joey Daweko. Falls to 21-9-4, who is probably most widely recognized as being potentially the heavyweight that knocked out Anthony Joshua in sparring prior to the Joshua Ruiz fight number 1. And Daweko protested vehemently that he was hit to a shot in the back of the head, but really didn't provide any meaningful opposition to Kosobutsky in this fight, and the Kazakh retains his WBA international title. On the same card, we had a Cuban heavyweight. A bunch of people were asking me about on Twitter on Saturday. Jose Larduet proves to 6-0 with 5 knockouts in a really mediocre fight. It was just dull. But a Cuban heavyweight, and this guy's really got some skill. But what I'm going to point you to, if you're interested, is take a click on what's in the show notes and tell me if you think that the fighter in the blue corner, Salgado, was just ready to call it a day after Jose hit him with the shot that he hit him with. Bit of a soft finish. I don't want to call it a dive, but it's as close to a dive as I think you'll say.
It's like that was basically like when you go to work and clock out 7 minutes before, where it's like it rounds up technically, but you're just like, I'm out of here. I ain't waiting for this. I know you paid me for 8 hours, but you're getting 7 hours 53 today. Yeah,
4 rounds was enough. I think that's good. Called it. He went down and stayed down. We'll leave it at that. And then, last but not least, let me mention an impressive outing if you missed it. Saturday night live on UFC Fight Pass. Mexico's Elvis Garcia, who's fought a number of times recently at Big Punch as a heavyweight, improves to 12-0 with 9 knockouts, scores 3 knockdowns in the 3rd round, really looks sharp with an RTD 3 victory over Joel Shajgreen, who falls to 10-3 outside of San Diego, claiming the WBC Continental Americas Bridgerweight title. So I'll be interested to talk to Corey about that fight, or at least anything of note around that fight, as Corey did the live commentary for UFC Fight Pass. So that was the action for the week on this past fight week, Angelo.
All right. Anything I should know? Because, I like to know the good things, but I also like to know things that you're like, I should forget this immediately. Like, I should just not remember that I seen this. Is there anything like that? Because these are the things that I want to remember.
Well, I'm going to keep this really succinct, because if I talk for longer than 60 seconds on this, I'll be disappointed in myself. Saturday in Germany, we just talked about the show. Avni Yildirim actually was on the show. He improved to 22-4. And I don't think anyone that listens to this show will say at this point, who is Avni Yildirim? But if you did,
they might.
If you did, he, of course, was the same person that you asked the same question of when he fought Canelo Alvarez 2 fights ago. He scored 3 knockdowns in the very first round, taking a TKO1 victory over 42-year-old Bosnian Slavica Sumniovic, who falls to 37-52. 52 of those losses, unfortunately, 39 of those 52 losses, unfortunately, by knockout.
What a fall from grace. How you go from fighting on, he fought Anthony Durrell on FS1. He fights Canelo in, obviously, when you fight Canelo, you're fighting the biggest star in sport. Or not the biggest star in boxing, but I'm thinking, like, has there ever been a guy that fought a star in boxing, not even like at the Canelo level, and then followed it up with a guy with or with an opponent with 52 losses? That's quite a step down.
This goes back to our matchmaking discussion from a couple episodes ago. I just don't understand the friggin' point of this one. I mean, I know he's got to get back on the winning track and start piling some wins up, but good grief, come on. This is terrible.
All right. And then sort of Tim Boxeo awards that we want to give out? Like, all right, buddy, you're off. You're going to leave the club scene behind. Maybe you're heading for an undercard somewhere.
You know, a couple of episodes ago, Angelo, we talked about on the Story of the Week, M&R Promotions down in Miami. And I like them. They had a pay-per-view this past weekend that I watched, and it wasn't one of their best, but I still enjoyed it. And the main event was one of their signed fighters. It was 23-year-old Melvin Lopez. He improved to 26-1 with 17 knockouts. He looked good. Body shot KO 5 victory over Daniel Lozano. Falls to 15-12-1. Not the highest level of competition, but it was their bantamweight main event. This was on Friday. So Lopez might be a guy that's really, really close now at 23 years old to taking that next step out of discussions on our pod to, you know, news and notes at the end of your podcast. And, you know, Lopez is a Nicaraguan fighter. He built up a record of 21-0 in the first 14 of those in Nicaragua before relocating to Miami. And then when he got to 21-0 after those 7 fights, mostly in the United States and mostly in Florida, he was stopped in the 9th round at the hands of someone named a Chilean fighter named Jose Velasquez. But since then now, Lopez is on a stretch of 5 in a row. And he's a bantamweight. He's young. He's a heavy puncher. He's got a highlight reel knockout in 2020 that was like, if you're a fan of the Matrix movies, it was Matrix-esque, just spectacular. So I think, along with M&R's connections throughout the boxing world in the United States, I wouldn't be surprised if really, really close we're really, really close now to seeing Melvin Lopez step to the next level. So I wanted to mention him in this part of our show, and we'll have to look out for him going forward. Angelo.
All right. I mean, at 26-1, 23 years old, there's definitely a future, although we do need to see that level of opposition increase just a little bit. All right. Favorite part of the week now, guys. I think you all know what's coming next. Who's still fighting?
We have one person that I want to mention. It's not quite as high or as not quite at the level of, we mentioned Ricardo Mayorga here a couple of weeks ago. Mayorga ended up not fighting on that show, by the way, that if you're a consistent listener of the podcast.
So they just advertised him and then he no-showed? Cool.
Yeah, just pulled him off BoxRec at the last second. But before I mention them, I want to give a shout out to 2 road warriors that are fighting this weekend, both in the United Kingdom. Welterweight MJ Hall, 61-2. Only 5 of his 61 losses by knockout. Fighting Saturday on a Frank Warren show in the United Kingdom. And one of my favorite road warriors of all time, young legend, 26-year-old Naeem Ali. 2 wins, 71 losses, and 1 draw. Only 1 fight by knockout he's lost, and it was his last fight when he came in a late replacement against a really heavy hitter and retired after the 2nd round. Light middleweight Naeem Ali fighting on the Fight Zone UK card on Friday. And after that, Ali has 3 more fights already on the books on BoxRec, 2 in September and 1 in October. You got to love it. But the fighter, the grizzled veteran, coming to the ring here this coming weekend on Saturday in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, 41-year-old heavyweight, club heavyweight, God bless, Alonzo Butler, 33-3-2, fighting on a Christy Martin promotion show against someone named 27-year-old Brandon Spencer, 9-19-3. Now, Big Zo, 41-year-old, turned pro in 2000. And interestingly enough, for someone who amassed a record of 33-3-2, he doesn't really have any key wins to his name on his BoxRec. And also interesting, this has been kind of a key theme of this segment of our show. He did take off 2017, 18, and 19, but otherwise has stayed pretty active from 2000. Yeah, he's got a 3-year gap there, but fought in 2020 and back in action here on Saturday in Myrtle Beach. Now, after stringing together a career of wins, he fell for the first time in 2008. And all of you boxing nerds will recognize this name, to heavyweight Friday Akinyanye. And then just 3 years later, fell to another heavyweight that was fighting mainly in the club circuit, trying to peak. I take that back. He may have fought on HBO. I'm forgetting. But Travis Walker is a name that should ring a bell with a lot of people. And Big Zo lost to Travis as well. But 41-year-old Alonzo Butler back in action this weekend in South Carolina, Angelo.
I can't say I've heard of him because I haven't. Usually I've heard of all these guys that you say, this guy's still fighting, but this guy, I don't know. And Travis Walker sounds like a Friday Night Fights name. For sure he had to be on Friday Night Fights.
Definitely a Friday Night Fights guy. That's probably what I was thinking of. I probably overstepped on HBO.
All right, and what do we have to look forward to this weekend?
Well, first things first, it is 21:07 U.S. Eastern Daylight Time on Tuesday. And in about 50 minutes, we go live from Tijuana on ESPN Knockout. So we got to get Corey on and get moving here, because live boxing on a Tuesday night, all things stop, Angelo, so including our podcast.
Well,
so
we actually got to talk about that on the other podcast. We got some live boxing coming up in a couple months on a Tuesday. Interesting that is happening, but not too interesting if on the club level. I imagine that on the club level, any day could be ripe for a card.
Every day is for boxing on the club level. You just never know. Got to stay tuned. So Friday this weekend, we've got 2 off BoxRec shows that I'm really, really interested in, or at least I say off BoxRec. They're not currently on BoxRec as of today, Tuesday. And one of those is Ghana, one of my absolute favorite places to watch, live on Facebook. No real, top of the bill bout on the card, but Ghana provides me a lot of the same entertainment that I just documented in our story about Tanzania. So I really get excited whenever I catch the Ghana show and add it to the schedule. So I'm really looking forward to that. And then also another one, also on Friday, also not currently on BoxRec, we have a fight from Big Punch Arena in Tijuana on Fights Night pay-per-view, probably about $6. Young American prospect Jalen Skywalker back in action, where he started out his career in Tijuana, and he fought about his first, 6 or so fights in Tijuana as a pro, 5 or 4 of those in Big Punch Arena. He was featured as a young prospect to look for on a Ring City USA show back in April at West Point, if you watch that, United States Military Academy. And he's heading back down to Tijuana on Friday, and then has a fight scheduled in September 24th in Memphis. So I'm guessing he's just going to go down there and get back on the ring, and then get back in the ring in Mexico, and be back in the United States after that.
All right. He has a cool name.
I was just going to say, I think you had mentioned somewhere along another, Jalen Walker. Sky is a perfect nickname, of course, to throw in there. I love it. Angelo, I got to keep it real with you. So Saturday, there is a ton of live streaming boxing on Saturday. And I tweeted this out a couple of days ago. There are a total now I'm up to, and I'm sure some stuff will get added, 22 live streaming events across the world. And amazingly enough, doesn't kick off until about 10 or 11 a.m. Eastern time in the U.S. and Russia, with a show from Shamo Boxing. We highlighted them as a story of the week.
Russian Big Punch.
A 20-fight card.
Oh, wow.
Kicking off at 10 will be an exercise in stamina. And then the day just rolls on from there. Box Azteca in Mexico kicks off about 23:30 in the U.S. Eastern time on Saturday. So it's really more about quantity over quality. So I wish I could tell you there's a big club show to look out for. The good thing is I can promise you for next week, we are going to have some fantastic stuff to talk about. But right now, nothing really jumps off at the page. So I'll be watching all of it. I'll be tweeting out about all of it. It's going to be a glorious day. The one thing I do want to mention
Jake Paul
is not Jake Paul on Sunday. And they might have won a bridge too far for me on that one too. $59.95. Holy shit, man. That's a steep price. But the one guy I do want to mention, I contemplated not putting this in the show notes, but then I decided at the last second to put it in there, is Matamoros, Mexico, a place I've been many, many times. On Saturday, right across the border in South Texas, we have 19-year-old welterweight back in action, Kevin David Hernandez, 5-0-1. His brother Eli will be the main event fighter. But Kevin Hernandez is a favorite of the Sunday Puncher Discord because he has a mane of hair that is like second to none. It is unbelievable. I'm very envious of someone who has no hair. So we'll look forward to see Kevin Hernandez Saturday.
I mean, yeah, he's got an incredible mullet.
It's spectacular.
All right, well, I mean, Kevin's a fan favorite. I think people will be glad to know that he's fighting and will follow along. So with that said, let's bring on our guest. And now we welcome on esteemed boxing writer. You may have read him on Boxing Scene. He is an analyst and or commentator. He can do it all. You've heard him on ESPN. I remember hearing you call Sergey Kovalev versus Anthony Yard on ESPN. You may have heard him on Box Nation, CBS, NBC, Fight TV, most recently on the aforementioned UFC Fight Pass card that was this weekend. We heard our guest today, Corey Erdman. Welcome, Corey. I do want to point out, too, that Corey does, and this is, all that stuff is fine, but I think he'd be most proud of this thing. He has the distinction, the proud distinction of being the first commentator in the world to call 2 Bridgerweight title fights. Corey, welcome to the show.
All of that is true. All of those things are things I am proud of, but I think the highlight of my career is appearing on this very program, which I pay $3 a month to listen to as well. So this is really the highlight of my career. I thank you for the introduction, but Tim, really, this is what I've been working towards.
Well, you paid $3 for Tim to do research for you so you can call these cards. Let's be real.
Of course. Yeah. It's a symbiotic relationship, of course.
I've heard,
Listen,
though.
man,
oh, go ahead, Tim.
Let me get this. Hold on. Let me get this out of the way first, right off the top. If there's anyone doing research for anyone here, it's the other way around. Corey prides himself. I know, even though I've never asked him this question, I know this is true. Prides himself in his research because he does it second to none. Unbelievable depth of boxing knowledge. And so you, Angelo, I just must say you have that flipped. And this is the free podcast, by the way. We're not behind the Patreon wall.
Oh, okay. So everyone can hear this. Oh, even better. All right. However, if you are listening to this, give Tim $3 a month. He deserves it. He works really hard.
Unfortunately, I'm digging you for 4. It's 4.
Okay. All right.
Corey doesn't know what he's paying, but he's paying something.
No, I don't even care. I actually just sent Tim my credit card number, and I said, just fill in this blank. Tell me what you want.
I didn't know too much about you, Corey. I knew of you, obviously. I knew you existed in the sphere of people in boxing. And then Tim started to talk to me about you. And the thing that he said and mentioned was preparation and the amount of work you do in terms of preparing for things. So why don't we start here and just talk about, you call boxing, and I'm sure there's got to be someone listening to this who's at least vaguely interested and maybe how do you do that? So how do you get into this? But I think more importantly, what is your philosophy around preparation and any techniques you might have, any cool things you've run across over your time prepping to call these shows?
Yeah, so as far as getting ready for fights, I'm of the belief that I can't have too much information in front of me. What I like to do is kind of very specific. I like to write out I'm not scripting lines for myself, but I'm writing out specific things that I think would help tell a story on the air. So I'm not so much concerned about like, oh, he has 4 knockouts in the 4th round, because I don't know how I would work that into a narrative of the fight. There are a lot of kind of like statistical things that people could spend a lot of time digging up that you wouldn't ever use them on the air. So I don't spend my time worrying about that. I'm more worried about a fighter's technique, their backstory, where they're looking ahead and how this fight might play into that. And I like to have at least, 1 full page, which isn't always possible when you get into more obscure fighters or fighters that have been less publicized. But I like to have at least 1 full page on every fighter. And in addition to that, when possible, I like to have seen that fighter fight before. I want to see at least one of their fights in full before I go on the air and call them, so that I have some reference as to, what are they doing different in comparison to what they did before, or how have they improved? How are they lacking? How are they waning? So I like to go kind of above and beyond maybe what some other people would do, especially because, as you probably referenced, I call fights in a lot of places, and some of them involve bigger fighters who are easier to research, but a lot of them are involving fighters that, you're not going to find a profile about them in the New York Times. They're not going to have, a lot of write-ups on Boxing Scene or on Ring TV or wherever, kind of the notable boxing outlets where you could pluck information from. So you have to dig a little bit deeper. And if you don't, you're basically just going to be, kind of calling the action in front of you, which is fine. And sometimes you do wind up doing that. But you ask about my philosophy as a commentator. In a very general sense, I want to teach someone who is tuning in something about that fighter. Even the most educated fan, like yourself or like Tim, if you're tuning in, I'd like for you to learn at least one thing about that fighter from me, and then in terms of what I'm doing on the fly, I'd like to, if I can, point out something that you might not see, or you're like, that's a good observation. I saw that too. So in a general sense, those are the 2 main goals that I have going into a fight, as far as my research and what I'm looking to accomplish, like as a storyteller on the air.
So how much research do you think Max Kellerman was doing in that last year of HBO? Kidding.
Here's the thing. Now, that's the fun point. For the bigger your broadcasts get, the more assistance you have. So, the later, if you're working an HBO broadcast and you're getting the big bucks to work something like that, there's a research department who's going to put notes together for you. So I'm not saying that Max didn't go out and do his own research at all, but he definitely had kind of like a little bit of a stepping stool, where he could say, okay, here's a lot of information that I have. Now let me dig a little bit deeper on that. Let me formulate my own thoughts. On smaller shows, that research department does not exist, right? It's just you. So if you don't do the work, your level of preparation is entirely dependent upon you. On bigger broadcasts, even on, listen, there are shows that you watch on the air where I am the research department for other commentators. I do that as well, and I enjoy that. But when you're calling smaller shows, when you're calling club shows, that doesn't exist. So you have to go and do that work yourself. And I find, to tie it all together, that doing those smaller shows, calling fights with more obscure fighters, prepares me for when I'm calling those fights on ESPN, when the storyline is obvious. I've seen all of their fights ahead of time without even going back and finding them on Tim's feed or on YouTube or on Daily Motion or somewhere like that. Not to out any boxing pirates out there, but fights wind up on the internet.
I'll just create another account. Don't worry.
Yeah, good. But those prepare you for those moments when you're better. You make yourself a better commentator, I think, taking those more difficult assignments. So that's how I look at it.
And then, do you have any like anecdotes you could share of like you researching something or someone, and you're like, wow, that's interesting. I got to get this in on the broadcast.
Oh man. Okay, let me think. I think there was a show recently. Yes, there was a show recently. I'm not going to remember the fighter, but it was a show that I was calling in Belgium, and the fighter was also the owner of 2 Thai restaurants. And I worked in what the special of the day was. It was on the Riyadh Nurhi Sao Sinjang cruiserweight title fight. And I'm going to forget who the fighter was on the undercard. But yeah, he was the owner of 2 Thai restaurants, and I worked in what the closing time was and what the special was for the day into the fight, because that fight wasn't particularly exciting. But I thought, hey, this is notable. This is fun. So that's the most recent one that I can remember.
Can I mention one that Corey did? So, and this is going to be this was my all-time favorite, even though I'm probably missing a few, is Corey called a WBC Bridgerweight title eliminator, I believe, with Oscar Rivas.
Yes, yeah, and
right?
So Vera Luis, yeah.
Yep. So it was eliminator, I think, and it wasn't about Rivas that he slipped in, but the best point that he did slip in that I have now saved on my hard drive for the rest of eternity is that the first Bridgerweight title in the world, of course, was contested in December of 2020, won by Saul Farah.
So you made a mention of Saul Farah during a Rivas fight.
Of course, it was a Bridgerweight fight, and as the noted broadcast Bridgerweight expert that I am, I figured I had to delve into the history books. And I remember it was someone who was watching at that point, I think, thought I was making fun of Farah, and I was not. So I had to kind of go on my Twitter during the fight and say something complimentary about Farah, just so it was out there in the world that no. I love Saul as much as everyone who follows this podcast and who follows Tim's account. This is not a shot at Farah whatsoever. I wanted to give him his flowers during an eliminator bout.
You were covering your back because you knew that if it got to Saul, we would be having Saul Farah versus Corey Erdman in Bolivia, wouldn't we?
That's right, and there are a lot of. It's difficult to travel right now, and so I'm not certain that I could make it to that fight. But
of all the things, you're concerned about getting there. Not what happens when you get there and step into the ring, and when you weigh in and they're like, well, this ain't going to cut it. Well, put this in your pocket.
Yeah, well, I've seen some fights in Bolivia. I'm sure we could cut a deal, so to speak, about how that fight would end.
All right, well, you call Shamo boxing in Russia, which we've talked about that on the show before, and my memory is shaky on it. All I know is a big punch of Russia and green building.
Yes.
You're a big fan of... Well, I don't know if you're a big fan. You could tell us if you're a fan, but I know that you've called these Shamo boxing shows, and Tim says, very complimentary of them. So can you tell us a little bit more about Shamo boxing?
Yeah, so these are basically Russian club shows, sometimes with a main event that involves, someone like a Nikolai Potapov, who's, a little bit higher up in the world rankings. But in a general sense, they're very long Russian club shows that in English are broadcast on Salita Promotions, Dmitry Salita's YouTube channel. So I'm contracted to call those most of the time. There is a Shamo show this weekend, but I don't know that it's going to be broadcast in English. Maybe I'll get a late call after we record this. Who knows? But sometimes they're like 14 fight cards. Sometimes they're 23 fight cards. I have called anywhere from the entire thing to kind of the last 6 fights, depending on what's called for. And they're fun little intimate shows. And one thing that I like about the Shamo shows and RCC shows in general, like Russian club boxing, I find interesting because viewers of local or club boxing in the United States, we understand that if you had any degree of amateur success, so let's say you were, your regional Golden Gloves champion, or you were your state champion as an amateur, in a general sense, somewhere between your first 8 and 10 fights are going to be against fighters with losing records. They're mostly, there's going to be someone behind you, a manager or a promoter or both, that is invested in getting you to a certain record so that maybe they can get you on Showbox, and then maybe they can start making a little bit more money on you and not just on ticket sales. one thing I find interesting about fighters who are maneuvered in Russia and parts of the world close to Russia is that fighters who are the equivalent of that. So let's say a Russian fighter who was fourth in the country didn't quite make the Russian team, and like the guy who was maybe sixth in his weight class in the country, sometimes they wind up fighting one another. And sometimes while they're still vying for a spot on the Russian or the Ukrainian Olympic team, they'll actually fight one another. So you'll very often see pretty high-level amateurs who are like 1-0, 2-0, fighting one another early in their careers, almost so that the promoters and amateurs can weed out who's going to be good and who isn't. There's not as long of a leash for allowing you to be undefeated in that part of the world. So there are a lot of lopsided fights on those cards as well, but sometimes you will get some standout fights where you're like, oh, I genuinely have no idea who's going to win this fight. And it's kind of fun to call 4 and 6 rounders between pretty high level guys who just don't have that professional polish yet. So for those reasons, I enjoy it. And for the ones that I told you before, because I think as a broadcaster, it's a fun challenge to call a show that's either that long or that obscure. I think it just makes you better when you do have a little more information and a little more backstory.
It seems like that is not very Big Punch like, given it seems like you're saying we have more high skill, evenly matched fights that we may get between guys who are amateur level and vying for spots on Olympic teams. I from hearing Tim, I don't think that's necessarily what we usually get out of Big Punch.
Yeah, and you do get a little bit of that. Like, I would put the Shamo cards like slightly above, and all due respect to Big Punch Arena cards, which obviously I love. I even have a Big Punch Arena T-shirt. Thank you to Tim, which I wore, by the way, in San Diego, and got a few handshakes for that one from some of my Mexican colleagues in San Diego this past weekend. But there are portions of these Shamo boxing cards that are kind of like that, where it's obvious, someone needs a quick win. It's a first round knockout. Then you'll get those other things also. But I think by and large, Shamo cards, like on the whole, are a little bit of a higher level than Big Punch Arena, sometimes significantly so. But I think, the Big Punch of Russia is still a decent comparison in that it runs so frequently, just like Big Punch does. Like, there's something at the Soviet Wings Arena almost every single week in Russia, and the cards are really long, just like they are at Big Punch. So I think there are similarities, but they are different in certain ways.
Tim, you want to ask?
Jeez, Angelo.
No, not like there's a bad question to ask here, but you wrote in a question, so I'm just curious if you wanted to ask it, or did you want me?
No, I was going to say, geez, Angelo, thanks for trying to shoot down my Big Punch Shamo boxing comparison.
Oh, no, I didn't. That was all Corey. Corey was the one. I just set him up. He was the one that said that they're not comparable.
Well,
I know you didn't say that, Corey. I'm kidding.
like I said, there are similarities. I'd say like your top 6 fights on the card are generally of a higher level than you would probably ever see at the Big Punch. So that, like, but yeah,
yes.
In terms of how frequently the shows run and how long they are, it's the Big Punch of Russia.
Yeah, the top end of the shows are very different, aren't they? Speaking of Big Punch, I'm interested to hear, because you and I haven't had this conversation yet, but one of the heavyweights that has fought a number of times at Big Punch, Elvis Garcia, is one I've been watching, was ranked as the number 1 heavyweight in Mexico on BoxRec, actually. Took a drop down to Bridgerweight on the show that you just called in San Diego this past weekend on UFC Fight Pass. So I'd be interested to see what you thought of Elvis up close and personal.
Well, in terms of the condition that he got himself in, I think that was really impressive, because I think in November of last year at the Big Punch, if I'm not mistaken, he was about 40 plus pounds heavier than when he came in at for this particular fight. So he lost a whole lot of weight. He worked really hard in the gym. Joel Diaz was very complimentary of how hard he worked. And he took a little bit of something from his camp that he spent with Anthony Joshua in terms of kind of that work ethic and what was necessary. And I think that I'm of two minds when it comes to this, because of course the amount of belts in boxing is always confusing and is not something that we want more of. But at the same time,
yourself.
I could wow.
I understand it all completely. There's a lot.
Right. But I could see how in this instance in particular, if you're an Elvis Garcia and you're 6'2", and when you're in shape, in and around 217, 222 pounds, that the Bridgerweight division is where you're going to be physically matched the most even and the best. So I can see if you're an Elvis Garcia, how a true run at heavyweight is always going to be very difficult for him on a physical basis. So I can see why he would want to make a run at Bridgerweight, because maybe melting down below 200 is maybe not feasible for him right now. Maybe, in a year or two, as his body starts to transform a little more, it's a little more reasonable. But in the meantime, his choices are either to kind of like beef up and bide some time and then run into a true giant that even if he's more skilled than him, he's just not physically capable of matching up against him, or he makes a little bit of a run at Bridgerweight. So I can see why he took this opportunity. And I thought that he looked pretty good in this fight. I thought that he was hyper aggressive. I thought that he used, and these things don't always correlate, but Elvis was like a state caliber, he medaled at state in high school wrestling. And you could see when he was with Joel Shogreen on the inside, just his body positioning, and the way that he was able to just move Shogreen around and bully him around at this weight against people in and around his size was pretty impressive. So I think that, if there, to the degree that there is a Bridgerweight division for the next little while, he could factor into this. It'll be fun to watch him.
Well, I don't know if we want to get into an extended conversation about Bridgerweight. I was on the call when the WBC posed the 224-pound division, and Mauricio was very upset. Well, I don't know if upset's the right word to say here, but he was not happy with Samson Lukovitz, who I'm sure everybody knows. Samson immediately cut off the speech announcing this new proposing of this new division, and Mauricio kept cutting him off and saying, like, Samson, stop, let him talk. Just hear him out. Have an open mind. And Samson's like, this is nonsense and whatever. We don't need another division. There's too many divisions in boxing and all that stuff. And I feel like on some level, the theory of it is good. You have so many guys who are caught in that no man's land where cruiserweight isn't viable because maybe they can't lose that sort of weight. Or on a physical sense, like, to fight at cruiserweight would require them to be a level of would require a level of athleticism that they may not have. They're a little too big, a little too lumbering to be like full-fledged cruiserweights, which pushes them to heavyweight. But then you're 219 pounds and 6'2". And while 219 may work for Deontay Wilder, who's also 6'6", 6'7", if you're 6'2", what do you do? And I feel like also there's the optimization. I don't know what other way to say this, but there's the optimization of getting the most out of your body physically and your skills for every weight. So like when you're 5'7", you theoretically could fight at welterweight like someone like Manny Pacquiao, but you could optimize yourself and get as much as you can out of your body physically by fighting at 135. But do you think that there's any viability long term for Bridgerweight to kind of crack through? Because we've seen that in America, at least, cruiserweight has just not cracked.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that, and you actually raised some good points there in that the people of the dimensions that we're talking about, the 6'2", 6'1", somewhere between 210 and 225 type guys, basically what the old heavyweights used to be. We always talk about what their dimensions used to be. There is no way for them to kind of optimize themselves in a weight sense in boxing. They just don't fit in unless you have kind of otherworldly power and can make up for those dimensions. You don't have the luxury that almost every other body type has in boxing, right? Like in a certain sense, like there's just some things that you can't really box with. If you're a person with short arms and like long legs, like you're probably not going to be a boxer. But if otherwise you are proportioned and skilled to be a boxer, but you fit into that zone that we're talking about, there really is nowhere for you to fit in. So, like, I don't know. I suppose any division could really take off if you start to get good fights and good names in it. And of course, we're not going to have monstrous names in this division right off the hop. But I would say that on paper, when you look at some of the people who have opted into this division right now, they can make for some pretty good fights. Now, we thought we would get one of those out of Kudryashov and Romanov, and it turned out to be a real dud. But on paper, that looked like and was supposed to be an awesome fight. And so even if you remove the division and the belts, and if all we get out of this is some really good fights between some undersized heavyweights, I think it's still a positive for boxing fans if the action that we get turns out to be pretty good. And I thought that for, going back to Elvis Garcia and Showgreen, for a club fight, an 8-rounder that went 3-4 rounds, I forget which round it ultimately ended in, it was pretty fun. Two higher tempo type heavyweights who were undersized, who were really aggressive. It was a fun fight. And if that's what we get out of this division, then I can't complain about that. Honestly, I watch worse stuff every single week.
Tim's looking around like, me too.
I watch because of him. Yeah. So.
I don't think I watch as much as Corey. Corey is one of the biggest. Corey and my friend King Dinesh are the two biggest sports degenerates I've ever met in my entire life.
Wait, sports or boxing? Because
Both.
And Corey, your reputation, most of it comes from Tim. So, what I've heard from you or about you is that you are a combat sports junkie. So are you saying that it's actually not just strictly limited to people punching each other in the face, but also like all the other sports?
I will say now, I'll make a couple adaptations here. Number one, I'm a boxing junkie. I have no disrespect towards MMA, but with the amount of boxing that I watch and the other things, which I'll touch on in a second, I just don't have time to do both. Plus, my profession is mainly within boxing, so I have to watch a lot of boxing. I do not watch as much as Tim. By nature, a lot of it, I rely on Tim's links to find out where to watch some of those things. Now, sometimes I'm already watching them, and I'll message Tim and say, hey, are you watching this? And we are. But Tim watches more boxing than I do. I think I watch more boxing than most people on the planet. But I am also a diehard fan of a handful of teams in other sports, namely the Detroit Tigers, the Cleveland Browns, the Notre Dame Fighting Irish in college football. And I watch everything that they put out there.
That's a lot of pain.
Tigers. It's a lot of pain throughout my entire life. But those are the things. And by the way, I will watch their minor league affiliates as well, which I think is what Tim is referring to, because I've messaged him a couple times saying, oh, no, I'm watching an ECHL Indy Fuel game right now. Sorry, I can't tune into this fight. I will do that also.
Damn, Lou DiBella just was very happy to hear you say that.
Well, yes. Shout out to the Richmond Flying Squirrels, even though they are not a part of the Detroit Tigers organization.
Well, minor league baseball is condensing. I wonder where they fit into that. But that's another podcast. Imagine that there's a Tim Boxeo podcast, but for minor league baseball. There's got to be. And
I'm in.
Well, what would the equivalent be like? Would we be covering Sunday league teams as well? I'm curious.
Yeah, it would be called Tim Baseball, and I would be, your resident Toledo Mud Hens expert, and I'd come on every week for some updates.
I would prefer you were the Biscuits.
We'd cover the Mexican League.
We can do that too, yeah.
Oh yeah, the Tomateros and all them down there. So there's also a big punch in Latvia, at least kind of. But I'm really curious more about. I want to ask about a particular fight that happened a couple of years ago, and it was Marius Bradis and Krzysztof Glowatsky.
Yeah.
You may remember when they, I don't know if they created their own commission, they borrowed a commission, but we had some Las Vegas officials head over to Latvia to officiate this WBC cruiserweight title fight. And referee Robert Byrd, normally very good, possibly he's on the decline in terms of his prime as a referee, but he had this egregious error where we saw Bradis elbow Glowatsky in the head. Now, I say all that to say, do you have any instances or examples in your travels of seeing things like that and you're on commentary?
Oh, I'm trying to remember. You're going to have to give me a moment to try and remember something like completely wacky. What I do remember of that particular card, to tie it into this week's action, is that Hassan Hassanov, one of my favorite Shamo boxing fighters, the light heavyweight / cruiserweight, was on the undercard against Ricard Bolotniks, who is a veteran who's a veteran of Club Rigas Rings, which really is the big punch arena of Latvia. So I'm going to let you mull that over while I try to think of something bizarre that maybe I've seen a referee do.
Well, while Corey's thinking, Tim, were you the one that kind of pointed out to me that Joshua Buatsi was fighting basically a fighter out of Big Punch, and your comparison was the fact that Latvia Gym Club Rigas was effectively operated as like a Big Punch in Latvia?
Ooh. Buatsi,
because he just fought Bolotniks.
He did fight Bolotniks. I think, yes, that happened, and I think I'm trying to remember now too. I think what spurred my wanting to share that with you was the actual tweet from Corey that Bolotniks started his career in Club Rigas in Latvia, I want to say.
Yeah, and those fights, by the way, if you've never seen them before, and they don't really, if they do happen, they go unrecorded, both on video and on BoxRec as well. But they were in Club Rigas, which is a tiny boxing gym in Latvia, and there would be just a referee, and sometimes it was Evgeny Andreev, who, Tim, you definitely know from those Fight Zone cards, just a terrific journeyman. Sometimes he was the referee, but there would just be a referee.
What, a journeyman? So he also fights?
Yeah, so sometimes he was the referee. Oftentimes it would be someone who would moonlight as a referee but was also a fighter. But there were no judges because the referee was also the judge, and it never needed a judge because the winner was never in doubt in any fight that ever occurred at Club Rigas Ring. So you would get guys coming in that really, really didn't know how to fight. I'm talking but not only that, but their attire let you know that they didn't know how to fight, or maybe didn't even know what fighting was, because they would have Velcro gloves with no tape. They would be wearing,
easy to do.
Shorts with pockets. They'd be wearing gardening shoes. I'm not going to remember the fighter's name, but I unfortunately, I might have actually been a part of the demise of Club Rigas Rings, because I remember tweeting about one of the fights. It must have been in like 2014, 2015, and saying, "Look at this! Look, this is a real fight that was on BoxRec. Like this is incredible." And suddenly that fight had like 10,000 views on YouTube. And not long after that, there were no more fights that were being broadcast from there. And now when you go to their YouTube page, which is just called Real Boxing Show, the promoter of those events is now just doing kind of exercise, boxing instructional things for you. So that's what's left of that page, but all of those fights are still archived there, and they also have a 24/7 stream that never goes down, playing old archived Club Rigas Rings bouts. So I really suggest that everyone listening to this go out and find that.
So what Corey's trying to say is, one, if you want your event to go viral, you should definitely get him to tweet about it. Is that that was the takeaway there, right?
Yeah, or if you want your tweets to go viral, you should let me know as well. I can find those.
Or if you want people to start investigating your sanctioning body for corruption, yeah.
Yep. Yeah, give me a call. Yeah, I'm.
Corey can tweet about that too.
as I referred to earlier, I'm available. I'm for hire for research purposes as well.
We'll talk. We'll talk.
Get at me in DMs.
About the one of the sanctioning bodies that I need some dirt on.
All right. Is it the UBF? Is it the UBO? Who are we going after?
The WBF.
Okay. All right. Well,
the World Bodybuilding Federation.
Oh, perfect. All right. Well, it'd be a conflict of interest if I owned an Ico Pro shirt. Should I take that to the thrift shop?
Let me ask you this question.
Yeah.
Which fighters have you seen on like these like really low level cards? Like, who do you think has gotten the farthest? And like, if they were the headliner when you first watched, I don't know necessarily if they count because they were like, but I want to know like, who have you seen really grow from like being kind of on the lower level part of the card all the way up until, I don't know, they fought on ESPN or Fox or something?
Yeah, I think the best example of this is, now we're going to take it to Canadian club shows. So I think the best answer for this is Sammy Vargas, who now we've seen fight on DAZN, on ESPN, on FS1, on Fox, everywhere. Where he started was on like Canadian club shows, and I think Sammy might have had somewhere between 10 and 20 amateur fights just on the local circuit here in Ontario, in Canada. And he was in like absolute undercard wars, you know, not the types where you're like, oh, one of the participants in this is going to go on to be, you know, a pretty high level fighter that's going to main event on some big platforms. Whatever you think of Sammy Vargas, you know, he made a heck of a career for himself. I definitely did not think, and I don't think anyone did. I don't think anyone thought that he would reach the heights that he ultimately did, because yeah, he was, you know, from, you know, his pro debut to like his 8th or 9th and 10th fight, he was in wars with other kind of club level fighters. And then I think just he found a promoter in Lee Baxter here who befriended him and gave him the money and resources to train harder and more often than his contemporaries, who probably weren't like born with more skill than him. But he was just able to work a little bit harder, and he had the capacity to work harder than other people. He had the desire to do it. And that's what I think a lot of people don't realize, is that as much as people want to believe that, you know, boxing is this like great meritocracy, generally, if you have money and time, you can build yourself up to a certain level. You know, like we're seeing that with like, you know, Jake Paul, for example. He has time and money and resources to train nonstop. And as a result, he's going to be better in a very short period of time than someone that has to go and work a day job. So, yeah, I think that Sammy was probably the best example of that, who, you know, just because he was able to – he was really exciting, and he sold tickets early on, and he made friends with someone who also wanted to break into the boxing business, and they kind of worked together to build themselves up into something. He's probably the best example of that.
That's a good one. I never even had considered that. And I totally forgot also that he was from Canada.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wait, aren't you from Canada?
I am, yes. He's from here in Toronto. We both live in the same city.
Oh. So you were probably very proud when Tim tweeted out that picture from Tanzania and the guy in the crowd was wearing the Blue Jays hat.
Well, I'm not a Blue Jays fan, but I'm always interested when Canadian culture finds its way over to different countries. Yeah, of course.
To boxing shows in Tanzania.
Tanzania, by the way, bring it back to Shamo boxing. That is the new place where they seem to be hunting for opponents. Tim, who's on this weekend's Shamo show? Like, every once in a while, they kind of pick a new country where they bring in B-sides from, and right now, the country that's in vogue is Tanzania.
They've been on a hell of a run, haven't they? And it's been not exclusively in Russia either, which was kind of interesting. There was, you know, you'll both know my memory, but there was another country just within the past month that had 4 or 5 fighters from Tanzania on.
Was it French New Guinea? Or what? I may have butchered that one. I don't know, but from your reaction,
I imagine the reason is just like where is a country that can travel without restrictions right now? And my guess is that Tanzania can go to Russia without too many issues because they've been able to bring in some really last-minute opponents from Tanzania on some of these shows in Russia. And the fighter I was thinking of, Tim, is Saeed Mabelwa, who I know you were going back and rewatching a fight from, I think, in 2014, somewhat recently.
Mm-hmm.
So he's on this weekend's show. He's fighting Nikita he's fighting Nikita Solonen at the Floyd Mayweather Boxing Academy in Russia. This is the home
I've
to
seen
this
that one
weekend's
before.
Yeah.
All right, final question. Tim, you can participate in this one too. Let's say we were doing a fantasy draft of like club scenes. So Big Punch would be a scene, the Shamo would be a scene. What's like the first 5 picks you think of the club boxing fantasy draft?
Oh, okay. Big Punch is number 1, both because it has kind of its own vibrant local scene, but also because people parachute in there to come and pick up wins. So I think that because it's a global scene, but it also has its own flavor. I think Big Punch has to be number 1.
And Tim's also made it world famous.
Yeah, and he has made it world famous. I think that although we don't see footage from a lot of it, I think like Colombia is a sneaky pick as well. Russia's definitely up there as we've been talking about. But to bring it back home a little more towards you guys, like the American Midwest has some great and hilarious club shows as well.
Tim loves the Midwest shows.
Yeah, and some of I remember kind of early in my career working shows at the Horseshoe Casino in Hammond, Indiana, and I have great memories of doing shows there on a boat casino outside of Chicago. Like that was some of my earlier, like as a professional, earlier introduction into club boxing. So I always have an affinity for Midwestern club fights. And in Detroit, I just as a fan, I would go to some of the Carlos Linus club fights in Detroit as well. So I'm a big fan of club boxing in the American Midwest.
Shout out to Reggie Strickland.
Shout out to Reggie Strickland, exactly. Yeah, and Leonardo Tyner, one of my favorites of all time as well.
I think most people should know that name.
Vital to the club scene in Detroit, where he'd often kind of just be the main event. Him or Daryl Cunningham would be the main event, and then you just get your typical local fodder beneath them, and it was awesome. Because they could sell a few tickets, they made those shows possible.
Man, Columbia was a good one. Definitely Big Punch, number 1. I made a statement a couple of shows ago that, or maybe it was when we were interviewing Alejandra Angelo, that I just can't imagine a venue anywhere in the world that's busier than Big Punch. So it's got to be the busiest venue in the world. So I think Big Punch is definitely number 1. Columbia, damn, that was a good one. Columbia's a good pick.
Neither Corey didn't mention Shamo in the top 5.
I said Russia just in general.
Oh, Russia.
I lump in Shamo and those RCC cards.
Isn't Russia like a quarter of the earth?
Yeah, but that's they have an advantage when it comes to this race.
So the U.S. got the Midwest.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah,
and Russia gets all of it.
It's the entirety of it. Yeah, my Russian geography isn't great, so look, northern Russia, let's say, is number 2.
Okay, you know what? I'll throw in. We're doing top 5, so we got a little leeway here, and in no particular order. I'll confirm Colombia. I like the Colombia pick. Russia's got to be in there. I think a good one too, and we always think about it from how disappointing it is, but no one can do it quite as bad on the club level as Germany. Germany can be really low on the club level.
Yeah.
So that, and I don't mean to say that in a disparaging way.
Mercedes-Benz dealership, I'm down with that one. I'm down with this pick.
Yeah, Germany is an outside shot. I mean, their boxing in general is in a state of disarray right now. But I wanted to throw some, Africa in there in general, just because I get so much entertainment out of it. Ghana can be really, really active. but then they go quiet for a long time. But I would probably say Ghana. I think the overall, there's so much to love around Ghana, from how long their shows run to starting main events at 3:30 in the morning and still having a full stadium. I mean, there's just, I think Ghana for me is top 5 as well.
And the atmosphere at those shows is nuts too. You know, like people getting like paraded through the streets and whatnot. Like it's not club boxing to them. Like that's a national event when those fights go on. So that makes it special as well. We didn't mention the UK, which literally broadcasts its club scene on Fight Zone every single week, which gives us an immense amount of entertainment. And, you know, I think sets the standard for like probably the best and most tenured journeyman in all of boxing likely come out of the UK. And the way you guys have talked about it, I'm sure plenty on the show, the way that they treat and value journeymen is totally different, where it's almost accepted even by the broadcasters of the fight. Like, oh, this guy's going to lose, but let's look at how this other guy performs who is obviously going to win. It's something totally unique to UK club fighting that's fascinating.
That's a really good point. We just talked about 2 of those guys, Naeem Ali being one of them, fighting this weekend. And they do look at it differently. And there's nowhere else in the world and you know, that's another thing I love about all these different scenes in general, just about how unique each of the countries are. And I was talking to Mike Altamura in Australia. Australia's got a wonderful club scene as well. And he brought up how much I love Australian auctions. And I love them because they only happen in Australia. And that's another just a wonderful thing about UK club shows. It's a great point, Corey, is that those professional journeymen that are vital to their club scene there, that doesn't happen anywhere else in the world. These guys that can lose 75 times and get knocked out once. I mean,
yeah, well, and it's a pulling back of the curtain of like what we otherwise inherently understand about how boxing is managed, how boxing is booked, so to speak, in pro wrestling terms. But they're open about it. I mean, like, yeah, well, his purpose here is just to teach this younger fighter and to get him another win, rather than like trying to disguise it or saying that after a fighter has 10 losses that you know he ought not to fight at all. They find value in these boxers, and they're also transparent about it. One thing I did want to bring up, by the way, from my trip to San Diego, Tim, you're going to really appreciate this. So we were at the casino bar, and I'm talking to a gentleman named Hector Fernandez, who's the manager of Alma Ibarra, and I was wearing my Big Punch Arena t-shirt, and he points it out, and I'm like, yeah, I love Big Punch Arena. I love Mexican club shows. We get to talking, and I bring up one of my favorite memories from pandemic era boxing was, you'll remember this, the Mexican club show on the beach that's clearly on like a beach patio, or like the ring is literally in the sand. I don't know, but the camera was tilted, and Dennis Douglin was fighting on that card. And I bring that up to him. I'm like, yeah, I remember, you know, back in June watching Dennis Douglin on like a horizontal camera. And he's like, fuck, like that was my show. I'm like, oh my God. Then we really got to talk. And so Hector Fernandez is the man that also puts on those shows. He also manages a couple pretty good fighters like Ibarra and DJ Creel and some others. But now me and Hector, good friends. And I told him, listen, I will do this show for free if you fly me out to Mexico, if you let me call the next tilted camera Mexico Beach. So I put that out there. I won't give anyone else that rate. If you're listening in, I'm not doing your show for free. Only this one. So hopefully that happens in October. He has a show on October 2nd on the beach, and I'm hoping to be there.
Oh, that's fantastic. And there was one right on the beach, and I don't think it's the one you're talking about. I think the ones you're talking about were in Rosarito, just next door to Tijuana at Papa's and Beer.
Yes, right. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
That's super cool.
All right. Well, if you need a commentator, you know who to pick, or you know who to call on. That is Corey Erdman, who's been our guest here today. Corey, thanks for coming on. This was a fun talk, even though we had to redo it a couple of times for various reasons. I really do appreciate, and I'm sure Tim does too, having you on. And really, I don't know who I could go to if not for Tim, when it comes to the knowledge on the club scene.
Well, I appreciate you having me on, and I'm sorry about the restarts. You have to censor certain things to keep the peace in the boxing community. So I hope that this version
was my fault. I'm sorry. I went overboard. But, I don't think you could blame me for that. Like, I had Corey Erdman in front of me. I was definitely going to try to put you in a compromising situation, and you rightfully said, nah, we're not doing that today.
Yeah, sorry, I'm calling my agent. I'm out of here.
So, what's the next card you're calling? Can you give us a rundown of where people are going to be able to find you?
Oh, yeah. So I was supposed to be calling the Kim Clavel show in Quebec this weekend, but that actually just yesterday got canceled. So I actually don't officially know which card I'm going to be commentating on. I'm going to be working behind the scenes on a couple of shows coming up. I do a little work behind the scenes in like a research capacity for Triller and for DAZN. I think most people know that as well. So I'll be working on those shows. But as far as what I'm calling next, I was supposed to have two shows this weekend, both Shamo and the Montreal card, but those have dropped out. So I'll tweet it out when I know. And it's never too long in between gigs because I will absolutely call anything. So as you said, just give me a call.
And any articles you're working on for the various publications you may appear on?
Mm-hmm. So I have an article coming out on Kaylee Reese, who you probably watched if you're watching the UFC Fight Pass card. The WBA is 140-pound champion. I have an article about her coming out for CBC, which is our national broadcaster here in Canada. So that'll be coming out soon. And then every Monday I have an article or column up on Boxing Scene. So you can catch me doing that. And I'm working on something as well about just bare-knuckle boxing in general. And whether it's and twofold, whether it's a safer sport than other combat sports and why it's become almost a sanctuary for women's fighters as well, who have been able to go there and make quite a bit of money relative to their past combat sports professions. So just want to work on something a little bit larger and a little bit longer on bare knuckle boxing. So I've been working on that too.
Can I complain about something really quickly?
Yes.
All right. So on Boxing Scene, if one wanted to find the latest from Corey Erdman, they can't find it. There's literally one article on the page that has the author written, and so all of these other ones, you don't know if it's the famed Boxing Scene staff duplicate press release article, or it's actually something that someone has put their name on and put a lot of time into. That's something that should probably change.
So in my case, that isn't the case. Like if you go to whatever my latest article is, I'm sure it was on Manny Pacquiao, and you just click on my name, you'll get every article that I've ever written then. Like it'll be sorted by author. So you can do that. But yeah, a lot of the stories, obviously, there are aggregates from either news releases or just kind of general news reports that are penned by sort of the staff, which isn't me, it's other people on staff. That don't have a byline. But yeah, if you do want to find all of my articles, see my latest one and click on it, or just Google Corey Erdman Boxing Scene, and the first thing that comes up is my author page, and you can read everything I've ever written there. So you can find me there.
I'm just saying on the main page, you can't really distinguish what's what unless it's in the featured thing. You have to start clicking. And your latest article, I think, is called "If He Chooses to Retire, Manny Pacquiao Can Walk Away with Dignity."
There you go. So if you want to read anything else I've ever written, just go there and then click on my name. But yes, if get Rick Reno on the show, maybe he can walk you through the design of the page.
I'll talk to him in private.
Perfect.
Any thoughts you want to give on Manny Pacquiao and your Dennis Ugas a couple of days removed?
Yeah, I think. I mean, I put it all in the article. I think that it is not a bad way for Pacquiao to go out in that he was competitive. He dared to fight someone that he didn't have to fight on 10 days' notice. He's one of the biggest stars in the sport. He's one of the only crossover mainstream appeal boxers. He could have just said, "Nope, we're gonna delay this, and I'll fight whether it be Ugas or someone else in a little bit." He didn't have to do that, and he went in and he lost honestly. And I think he realized his physical limitations at this point. And if Manny doesn't have his legs, he's just kind of a high volume arm puncher who's creative offensively, and if you're long and accurate as your Dennis Ugas is, you're likely going to win that battle on a higher level. So it's nothing to be ashamed of for Pacquiao, even at 42. Listen, he'd probably beat most of the welterweights in the world still. Like anyone outside of like the top 10, top 15, he's going to beat still. And for him to be where he is at 42 is still incredibly impressive. But it's better for him to go out now and not on, like getting flattened by someone better in the welterweight division. Because if he does continue on, at some point that will start happening. So it's best for him to kind of go out when all the publicity around him is very positive. There's nothing to be ashamed of about that performance. I think that probably should be the last time that we see him, unless he wants to do one of these kind of gimmick fights where he's not in any danger whatsoever. But in terms of like real fights, I think that should be it for him. I think
that's a great take. I mean, I think it was helped out by the fact that anybody watching that fight just saw like, okay, Manny got beat by the better man that night. And it was without any disrespect. It's like Ugas was just, he had his number, but he didn't. He didn't make it sad. We've seen so many times in the past when it's just one fight past the expiration date, and it just is uncomfortable to watch. This was a respectable performance, and that was a great take from you. So thank you, Corey, so much for coming on. Tim, what should people do now that they finish the episode?
Please go in and subscribe if you're not already subscribed. But also, if you could be so kind as to leave us a rating, even put down a few comments about what you like about the show. Give us a 5-star rating. We'd really appreciate it. Help us get on the radar screen for those who might enjoy all these things that, as a listener, you enjoy and that we love talking about. We'd really appreciate it. So thank you very much for listening.
Follow Tim Boxeo on Twitter at Tim Boxeo. Go over to the bio, check out all the links. There's a link to the Patreon, the Discord, the podcast, and the Tim Boxeo shop. Just about anything Tim Boxeo is there. And of course, stay for the clips. Definitely scroll down through the timeline or check the show notes. See the end of the Farah Tabares fight, which is glorious. Thank you guys so much for listening. We'll be back next week.